Today we're talking comic books, specifically the collection of comics called The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck, written and drawn by Don Rosa. This collection was originally published in the early 90s in Europe, and later during the mid-90s, around 96 in English. These stories showcase a number of Scrooge McDuck's early life experiences, from earning his first dime in 1877 to meeting an adult Donald Duck and attempting to regain a sense of family which he had lost when his fortune became more important to him than his kin. Through these stories, we see Scrooge be swindled and hardened into the miser he's known as, but we see how he gets there and what he loses along the way. We start with the last of the Clan McDuck, where a 10-year-old Scrooge earns his first hard-won pay, an American 10-cent piece. As he lives in Scotland at this point, the dime's worthless to him, and he gets angry at being tricked, not knowing this was a trick set up by his own father to teach him not to be so trusting of others. We jump from there to 1880, where a 13-year-old Scrooge outsmarts a dastardly rival clan to the McDucks, the Whiskervilles, a bunch of dog-noses who were trying to scare the McDucks off their own land in order to search for an old legendary hidden treasure. Having dealt with the Whiskervilles for now, Scrooge leaves for America to find his fortune. There was an episode from the cartoon DuckTales that offered a different variation to Scrooge's departure from Scotland, making him a little older and giving him an interest and lack of talent for bagpipes. The next two issues in the collection place Scrooge in America, trying and failing to strike it rich. In The Master of the Mississippi, Scrooge meets the Beagle Boys for the first time when they attempt to rob Scrooge's uncle Angus Pothole McDuck's riverboat. He also meets Ratchet Gearloose, Gyro Gearloose's grandfather. Turns out working on a riverboat isn't the best job for Scrooge, so from there he moves on to the Buckaroo of the Badlands, where he gives the cowboy lifestyle a shot. He's actually pretty good at roping and riding and meeting historical figures, as in this issue he meets Murdo Mackenzie, another Scotsman and owner of the Matador Land and Cattle Company, as well as Theodore Roosevelt, future President of the United States. It's after Scrooge saves Mackenzie's prize bull from being stolen by the McVipers that he becomes manager of Mackenzie's Montana cattle ranch for a few years. After a time, Scrooge strikes out as a prospective prospector in Raider of Copper Hill. Here he meets Howard Rockerduck, father to his eventual business rival, John D. Rockerduck. Scrooge is scrounging for copper at this stage in his life, finding the digging hard and fruitless, and he'd have continued on digging without profit if it weren't for Rockerduck's interference. Rockerduck learns that Scrooge owns a homestead on the land the Anaconda copper mine is located on, meaning the mine belongs to Scrooge. The good news doesn't last long, for as soon as Scrooge has come into money, a telegram from Scotland arrives telling Scrooge that his family needs his help. With a heavy heart, he sells his claim and heads back home. The New Laird of Castle McDuck is an odd short story where we come back to the Whiskervilles causing more trouble, once again trying to boot the McDucks off of their own property. Scrooge has to use the $10,000 he got for his copper claim to pay off back taxes on his family's land, but it gets the Whiskervilles off their backs. Scrooge actually dies for a few minutes and meets his deceased ancestors after a duel with the head of the Whiskerville clan, and we learn that stinginess is an inherent trait in McDucks, as though that came before him also penny-pinched. Sir Eider, for example, lost a war when he supplied his men with crossbows, but refused to purchase arrows for the cost. In 1886, Scrooge has again left home to forge ahead and find his fortune, this time in South Africa. In The Terror of the Transvaal, Scrooge meets his other greatest business rival, Flintheart Glomgold. It's worth noting that in this story, Glomgold is cowardly and weak, stealing all of Scrooge's belongings in the middle of the night after Scrooge saves him. Infuriated at the double cross, Scrooge takes his things back and publicly humiliates Flintheart. However, Scrooge only remains in South Africa 3 years, as the gold there just wasn't his to be found. The next issue in the collection is by far one of the strangest. Dreamtime Duck of the Never Never tells the story of Scrooge's 1893 trip to Australia on another hunt for gold, where he meets an old Aborigine wise man by the name of Jabiru Kapirigi. Jabiru reads Scrooge the dream tale which they find in a cave, of which acts like a prophecy for Scrooge's immediate future. After finding a giant opal, then losing it to a highwayman, Scrooge unwittingly goes through the motions of the dream tale, losing his number 1 dime, then getting trapped by a flash flood back into the Dreamtale cave. The highwayman loses the opal, and though Scrooge considers keeping it, he leaves it in the cave, knowing that's where it really belongs. Jabiru, pleased with Scrooge's choice, uses a crystal to read Scrooge's future, which shows him a representation of the Northern Lights, leading him to his life-changing trip to the Yukon. In 1896, Scrooge joins the gold rush in a story originally penned as the Argonaut of White Agony Creek in Europe, later called King of the Klondike. It's in this issue we meet some very important people in Scrooge's life. The woman of his dreams, and the one that got away, Goldie O'Gilt, as well as Grandma Duck's brother, Casey Coot. An important note for this issue is that Scrooge does something here you would never expect a duck like him to do. He borrows money, and he borrows it from a despicable pig called Soapy Slick. It's only because of what he's borrowed is Scrooge able to finally acquire some real wealth, but Slick's a real bad piece of work. I don't want to spoil one of my favorite scenes Rosa has ever done, so all I'll say is that Soapy Slick makes the mistake of poking and prodding at a grieving Scrooge McDuck and pays for it dearly. Anyway, at the end of this chapter, Scrooge finally strikes it rich with the biggest gold nugget he's ever seen. He's now got a gold claim, and he's only going to get richer from here. The next time we see him is in The Billionaire of Dismal Downs. Scrooge has gone back home to Scotland, but he's not quite welcome anymore. He's just a rich nobody now. The people he left behind hardly know him, and few want to. Scrooge tries to get the people to like him at first by competing in an old Scottish festival, but his new ways of tackling the old trials only serves to pull him further from his roots. In the end, Scrooge decides it's best that he and his family leave Scotland behind, so he takes his sisters with him to America, to a little 10-acre plot of land he happens to own near a settlement called Duckburg. Now that he's back in America for good, Scrooge meets the Duck family, including Hortense's eventual husband Quackmore, and the future mother to Gladstone Gander in Daphne Duck, who notably shares her son's impossibly good luck. In this issue, we are introduced to the Junior Woodchucks, and the Beagle Boys have returned, this time to feel the wrath of Hortense McDuck and her broom. Teddy Roosevelt makes another appearance, this time he's actually present now. The invader of Fort Duckburg makes for a good in-between chapter because it's the next one that's really important. The Empire Builder from Calisoda is by far one of the most significant comics concerning Scrooge's character. He's taken his sisters, Hortense and Matilda, with him to Africa as he's looking to expand his properties. We see him make shady business deals. He tries to force a voodoo sorcerer named Fulazula and his entire tribe from their land, and when Fulazula refuses to sell, Scrooge has the entire village burned down. Zula curses Scrooge. He sets a zombie to hunt after Scrooge for the rest of his days. Hortense and Matilda have had it with their brothers cheating people, so they return home to Duckburg, though Scrooge continues to travel globally for the next 23 years to continue building his empire. By the time he does return home, he's become so obsessed with profits that he has little patience for his sisters or their new family. Hortense attempted to introduce her twin children, Donald and Della Duck, to their uncle, but Scrooge simply didn't care. In the end, they leave Scrooge, and he has one short moment of realization that he's not going to see them again, but he's distracted by a note telling him now that he's the richest duck in the world. He immediately forgets his family right then and there. The last comic in this collection, The Richest Duck in the World, takes place on Christmas Day in 1947. Scrooge has invited his nephew, Donald, to spend dinner with him. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense as a standalone concept. Why would Scrooge call on family now out of the blue? There is a theory that the story actually takes place after another comic not included in this collection called Christmas on Bear Mountain by Carl Barks, where Scrooge has decided to have a little fun by giving Donald Duck a test. He sends Donald, Huey, Dewey, and Louie to his mountain cabin to spend Christmas. This seems like a sweet sentiment until you realize he did this because there are actual bears on that mountain, and he wants to terrify his nephew. What ends up happening is pretty much what you'd expect from a Donald Duck cartoon. A bear does eventually get involved, but it's nothing Donald can't really handle, and in the end, it looks like Donald isn't scared of the bear, which convinces Scrooge that he's quite brave. However, in this story, Scrooge has invited Donald and the triplets to see him on Christmas, and they do so. While there, Donald loudly notes how a lot of the artifacts from Scrooge's life must be fake trophies he purchased due to being eccentric, though Huey, Dewey, and Louie all believe everything they see there is real, all the suits of armor and photographs. Of course, there's a secondary plot dealing with the Beagle Boys trying to rob Scrooge's money bin, but the main plot of this issue lies in Scrooge's sense of family. This one ends well, if not bittersweet. Scrooge feels like it's all too late for him to have the family he wanted, but his nephews refuse to accept that. They'll be his family now, and he couldn't be happier. There's actually a second book that was published in 2006 with 8 more comics, The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck Companion. These stories fill in the gaps in the timeline and expand on important periods of Scrooge's life. There are 2 issues in particular, The Prisoner of White Agony Creek and Hearts of the Yukon, that go into more detail during Scrooge's time with Goldie O'Gilt. There's even a cute Chapter 0 sort of prologue, where Magica De Spell attempts to go back in time to steal Scrooge's #1 dime back in 1877 before it becomes his first coin earned. This, of course, makes it useless to her. She needs the first coin earned by the richest duck in the world so she can melt it down in the fires of Mount Vesuvius to make an amulet that would give her the Midas touch. Both The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck and its companion book are great pieces of Duck family literature, but they aren't easy to find. I've left a link in the description that will take any of you Duck fans looking to read the companion book online. Thanks for watching, Duck fans!